Imagine being a widow, grieving your husband, only to discover he had been living a double life, tangled in secrets, money, and dangerous people. Suddenly, the family you trusted turns against you, and the FBI shows up at your door. This is the story of Mary Thompson, a woman who lost everything, but found her courage when it mattered most. Welcome to Folktales Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment where you are watching from. When I first heard the story of Mary Thompson, it touched me in ways I can hardly describe. She was a woman who had given her entire life to her family, pouring her love, her time, and her very soul into the people she cared for most. And yet, in the middle of her grief, when her heart was already heavy with loss, she faced the kind of betrayal that no mother should ever have to endure. It is a story about family, about greed, about the cruelty that sometimes hides behind familiar faces, and also about strength, the kind of strength you never know you have until life gives you no choice but to stand. Mary Thompson lived in Los Angeles, California. For more than 40 years, she had been the devoted wife of Richard Thompson, a man who had built a reputation as a successful businessman. Together they had raised their daughter, Lisa. Their home in Beverly Hills was large and beautiful, the kind of place that spoke of wealth and stability. From the outside, people believed Mary had everything: a loving husband, financial security, and a daughter who seemed to have inherited all the privileges that came with being born into comfort. But life inside those walls was not always as perfect as it appeared. Mary was gentle, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who put everyone else before herself. Richard was often busy with work, and Lisa, even as a child, showed signs of wanting more than what she already had. She had expensive tastes, she liked to be admired, and she often dismissed her mother as if Mary were invisible. Still, Mary never complained. She told herself that patience and love could soften even the hardest heart. Then came the day that changed everything. Richard Thompson passed away. The man Mary had spent her whole adult life with was suddenly gone. He had been her partner, her anchor, even though his attention often strayed toward work and wealth. His death left her feeling hollow, as though the ground beneath her feet had cracked wide open. The funeral was a grand affair, attended by business associates, neighbors, and distant relatives. People offered condolences, but Mary felt strangely alone, as though the very people speaking to her couldn't understand the depth of her loss. Lisa, her only daughter, did not offer the comfort one might expect. Instead of holding her mother close, she seemed cold, almost impatient, as though waiting for something. Mary brushed it aside, telling herself that grief affects everyone differently. But only days after the funeral, the mask Lisa wore slipped, and Mary would see her daughter's true heart. It happened one quiet evening when Mary was sitting in the living room, holding a photo of Richard. Lisa walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her voice sharp. "Mom," Lisa said flatly, "you can't stay here. This house belongs to me now. Dad's gone, and it's time you faced reality." Mary looked up, stunned. "What are you saying, Lisa? This is my home. I've lived here with your father for 43 years. Lisa crossed her arms, her expression hard. "That was Dad's house, not yours. He left everything to me. I've already spoken to Mark, and we're moving in. You'll need to find somewhere else. Maybe a retirement home." The words sliced through Mary's heart like knives. She sat there frozen, unable to believe that the little girl she had rocked to sleep, the child she had fed and clothed, could stand before her now and speak with such cruelty. "Lisa," she whispered, her voice trembling, "how can you say that to me? I am your mother." Lisa's face showed no remorse. "I don't care. You're old. You'll drag me down. Dad trusted me with the estate because he knew I could handle it. You'll be fine. You've had your time here. It's mine now." Tears filled Mary's eyes as she tried to reason with her, but Lisa had already turned away, her heels echoing down the hallway. Within days, Mary was given no choice. Lisa and her husband Mark moved into the house, redecorating as though Mary's entire life there had been nothing but a placeholder for their own ambitions. Mary was forced to leave, carrying only a few belongings in a small suitcase. She ended up in a cheap motel on the edge of the city, The kind of place with peeling paint and buzzing neon signs that flickered through the night. Alone in that small room, Mary wept. She couldn't understand how things had unraveled so quickly. She had lost her husband, her home, and in many ways, her daughter too. She felt as though she were adrift in a sea of sorrow, each wave pulling her further away from the life she once knew. She wondered what she had done to deserve such cruelty. But Mary was not entirely helpless. Somewhere deep inside, a small spark of strength began to glow. She remembered something Richard's lawyer, David Miller, had told her after the funeral, that she should come see him, that there were documents she needed to review. At the time, she had been too consumed by grief to pay attention. Now, with nowhere else to turn, she decided to visit him. David welcomed her into his office with kindness. He was a middle-aged man with silver hair and a calm demeanor, someone Richard had trusted for many years. He listened carefully as Mary told him what had happened, how Lisa had thrown her out and claimed everything for herself. "Mary," David said gently, sliding a folder across the desk, "I think you need to see this." Richard updated his will shortly before he passed away. He left very clear instructions. With trembling hands, Mary opened the folder. As she read, her eyes widened. According to the will, Richard had left the house and the majority of his assets, nearly $20 million, to Mary. Lisa was to receive a smaller portion, about $10 million, held in trust. But there was a condition. Lisa's inheritance depended on how she treated her mother. If she disrespected or mistreated Mary in any way, her share would be revoked and transferred back to Mary. Mary stared at the words, hardly able to believe them. Richard had thought of her after all. For years she had wondered if he truly saw her, if she had been nothing more than a shadow beside him. But here, in black and white, was proof that he had cared. He had wanted to protect her. David looked at her with steady eyes. "Lisa doesn't know about this. She and Mark tried to present forged documents claiming the estate was entirely hers. That's illegal, Mary. We can challenge it. And if we do, the law will be on your side." For the first time in weeks, hope flickered inside Mary's heart. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't abandoned. She had been wronged, yes, but she still had a voice. That night, back in her motel room, Mary lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her heart was torn between sorrow and determination. She thought about Lisa, about the daughter she had loved so deeply, who now seemed like a stranger. She wondered if greed had consumed her completely, or if there was still a trace of the little girl she once knew. But more than that, she thought about herself. For too long she had lived in the shadows, always putting others first. Now life was forcing her to stand, to fight, to claim the dignity she deserved. Mary didn't know then just how complicated things were going to become, or how many secrets Richard had left behind. She didn't know about the darkness waiting to surface, about the danger that would soon wrap itself around her life. All she knew was that she was tired of being invisible, and that was enough to set everything in motion. The story of Mary Thompson was only just beginning. Mary sat quietly in David Miller's office the next morning, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes still swollen from a sleepless night. The folder with Richard's will rested on the desk between them, as though it held the key to both her salvation and her heartbreak. "Mary," David said, his tone gentle but firm, "we need to act quickly. Lisa and Mark are already trying to move assets into their names. If we don't stop them now, they'll bury everything in layers of paperwork and accounts, and it will be harder to get back what rightfully belongs to you." Mary nodded slowly, though her heart was pounding. She wasn't used to conflict. For decades she had lived quietly in the background, smoothing over arguments, avoiding confrontation. Now, suddenly, she was being asked to step into a fight she hadn't chosen. Do we really have to go to court?" she asked softly. David leaned forward. "I know it feels frightening, but the law is on your side." Richard made sure of that. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be here with you every step of the way." Mary drew a shaky breath. Somewhere deep inside, she felt Richard's presence, as though he were urging her not to give up. For the first time since his death, She felt less like a widow drifting in the dark and more like a woman being called to stand in her own light. Later that afternoon, Lisa and Mark arrived at David's office, confident and smug. Lisa wore designer sunglasses, her hair perfectly styled, while Mark carried a leather briefcase as though he were walking into a business deal he had already won. They didn't expect to find Mary sitting there across the table. "Mom," Lisa said, her voice dripping with annoyance. "What are you doing here?" Mary swallowed, her hands trembling under the table. "I came to hear the truth, Lisa. About your father's will." Lisa laughed, a cold sound. "Dad left everything to me. You know that. You're just confused." David cleared his throat and slid the will across the table toward them. "Actually, Lisa, that's not true. Richard's updated will leaves the house and most of the assets to Mary. Your share was conditional, and I'm afraid you've already broken that condition." Mark's face tightened, but Lisa's eyes flashed with fury. "This is ridiculous. Dad promised me everything. He told me himself." David's voice was steady. "Then perhaps you can explain why the documents you presented last week were forged. The signatures didn't match. The notary stamp was fake. That's a crime, Lisa. And we will be turning it over to the authorities." For the first time, Mary saw fear flicker across her daughter's face. Mark placed a hand on her arm as if to calm her, but his jaw was clenched. "You can't prove anything," he snapped. David didn't flinch. "Oh, we can. And we will." The meeting ended in chaos, with Lisa storming out of the office and Mark close behind her. Mary sat there shaking, but there was a strange sense of relief in her chest. For so long she had felt powerless, invisible. Now at least the truth was beginning to surface. That night, back at the motel, Mary sat by the small window, staring at the city lights. She thought about Lisa, about the bitterness in her daughter's eyes, the way greed had twisted her heart. Mary's tears fell silently, not only for the pain of betrayal but for the little girl she had once held in her arms, the child she had sung to sleep. How had it come to this? But alongside the sorrow, there was a new resolve. Mary realized that if she didn't stand now, Lisa and Mark would trample her completely. She had to fight, not only for herself but for the years of devotion she had given to her family. Over the next few weeks, the legal battle intensified. David filed motions, presented evidence, and called in handwriting experts who confirmed the forgeries. Lisa and Mark tried to delay, to intimidate, even to paint Mary as unstable, but nothing worked. The truth was too clear. When the case finally went before a judge, the courtroom was tense. Mary sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded in her lap, while Lisa sat across from her, her expression icy. Mark whispered furiously to their lawyer, but Mary kept her eyes forward, her heart steady. David presented the will, the conditional clause, the evidence of forgery. Then he asked Mary to take the stand. Mary's knees trembled as she walked to the witness chair, but when she looked out at the courtroom, she felt a calmness wash over her. She spoke simply from her heart about the years she had spent as Richard's wife, about the shock of his death, about the pain of being told by her own daughter to leave her home. "I loved my husband," Mary said, her voice breaking. "I loved my daughter. I gave everything I had to them. All I want is what Richard intended, to live out the rest of my days in the home we built together, with the dignity he wanted for me." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed moved. When the ruling finally came, it was decisive. The judge declared the will valid, condemned Lisa and Mark for attempting fraud, and restored full ownership of the estate to Mary. Lisa's inheritance was revoked entirely, as the clause demanded, and transferred back to Mary. Mary felt tears spill down her cheeks as the gavel struck. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, protected, and strong. But victory came with its own shadows. Lisa and Mark were furious. As they left the courtroom, Lisa turned back, her face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Mom," she hissed. "You think you've won, but you don't know the half of it." Those words stayed with Mary, echoing in her mind even as she moved back into her home. She tried to focus on the small joys, sitting in her favorite chair, tending the roses in the garden, hanging Richard's portrait back on the wall. But at night, when the house grew quiet, she couldn't shake the feeling that more trouble was coming. She was right. Because what Mary didn't know yet was that Richard had lived a life far more complicated than she ever realized. Hidden in his files, buried in the corners of his business dealings, were secrets that would soon pull Mary into a world of danger and deceit she had never imagined. For now, though, Mary allowed herself to breathe. She stood in the living room one evening, sunlight streaming through the windows, and whispered softly, "I'm home." It was only the beginning of a storm she could not yet see. The first few weeks back in her home were bittersweet for Mary. She wandered through the familiar rooms, touching the furniture, the photographs, the small trinkets collected over decades. Everything felt the same and yet different. The silence was heavier now, the absence of Richard's voice almost unbearable. Still, Mary was grateful to be home. After the motel, after the courtroom, just being able to sit in her own kitchen felt like a small miracle. But peace, as she soon learned, doesn't last forever. One quiet afternoon, Mary was cleaning Richard's study. It was a room she had avoided since his death, partly because it reminded her too much of him, and partly because she had always felt like an outsider there. Richard's study had been his kingdom, a place where he spent long hours behind locked doors, surrounded by papers and ledgers. As she dusted the bookshelves, her hand brushed against a drawer that wouldn't close properly. Curious, she tugged at it, and after a little effort, it slid open to reveal a false bottom. Beneath it lay a stack of envelopes, thick with documents. Her heart quickened as she pulled them out and spread them across the desk. The papers weren't what she expected. They weren't love letters or personal journals. They were financial records, bank statements, wire transfers, contracts with names she didn't recognize. Some were stamped with official seals, others scribbled with notes in Richard's handwriting. One phrase appeared more than once, underlined in red ink: Project Sierra. Mary frowned. None of it made sense to her. Why would Richard hide these? Why keep them from her? The next day, she decided to call Nancy Lee, a private investigator who had once helped a friend of hers. Nancy was sharp, professional, but also compassionate. When Mary showed her the documents, Nancy's brow furrowed. "This isn't normal bookkeeping," Nancy said, flipping through the papers. "These are shell companies, offshore accounts, money moving in circles to hide its origin. Mary, I hate to say this, but it looks like Richard was laundering money." Mary felt the blood drain from her face. No, that can't be. Richard was a businessman, yes, but he wasn't a criminal. Nancy placed a gentle hand on hers. "Sometimes people live lives we don't fully see. That doesn't mean he didn't love you. But these papers suggest he was involved in something big. And dangerous." Mary's hands shook as she gathered the documents back into the envelope. She didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. Questions flooded her mind. Who was Richard really working with? Why had he hidden it from her? And most terrifying of all, what did it mean for her now? Her fears were answered sooner than she expected. A week later, as she returned home from the grocery store, she found two strangers waiting outside her gate. They weren't dressed like debt collectors or lawyers. They wore suits, carried badges, and spoke with authority. "Mrs. Thompson?" one of them asked. "I'm Special Agent Laura Green with the FBI. This is my partner, Agent Cole." Mary's heart skipped. "The FBI? What's this about?" "We'd like to speak with you about your late husband, Richard Thompson," Agent Green said gently. "May we come inside?" Inside the living room, the agents laid the truth before her. Richard had indeed been laundering money, but not just for himself. He had been entangled with powerful criminal networks. What Mary didn't know, and what shocked her to the core, was that Richard had also been an FBI informant for years. "He was playing a dangerous game," Agent Green explained. "To the outside world, he looked like a businessman moving dirty money. But in reality, he was feeding us information, helping us build cases. That's why he couldn't tell you. He was protecting you." Mary's head spun. Her husband, the man she thought she knew, had lived a double life. He had kept her in the dark, not out of cruelty, but out of fear for her safety. And now, even after his death, the shadows of that world were reaching for her. "Mrs. Thompson," Agent Cole said seriously, "we need to ask, has anyone contacted you? Anyone unusual? Because if these people know Richard left you the estate, they may come after you." Mary thought of Lisa's bitter words in the courtroom. "You don't know the half of it." She shivered. The agents assured her that she would be protected, but Mary still felt the walls of her life closing in. She had gone from grieving widow to betrayed mother to sudden heiress, and now she was at the center of a dangerous investigation. That night, she sat alone in the study, staring at Richard's portrait. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Why did you leave me to find out this way?" Her heart ached with both love and anger. She had believed their life together was built on honesty, but now she realized Richard had carried secrets that could have destroyed them both. As days passed, the danger became more real. One evening, Mary returned home to find the gate unlocked and the front door ajar. Her chest tightened as she stepped inside. The house had been ransacked, drawers pulled open, papers scattered, furniture overturned. She called the police, who confirmed it was a break-in. But nothing of obvious value was missing. No jewelry, no electronics. The intruders hadn't been after money. They had been searching for something else. Mary's thoughts immediately went to the envelopes she had found in Richard's study. She had hidden them in the back of her closet after showing them to Nancy. When she checked, her heart nearly stopped. They were gone. The next morning Nancy arrived, her expression grim. "They know you have ties to Richard's records," she said. "They'll think you know more than you do. You're not safe, Mary." Mary felt her world spinning out of control. She was a 67-year-old widow who had spent most of her life cooking meals, tending gardens, and raising her daughter. She wasn't prepared for this. But as she sat in her living room, hands trembling around a cup of tea, a strange thought struck her. For years she had lived in the shadows of others. Richard's busy world, Lisa's demands, even her own silence. Now life was forcing her into the light, whether she wanted it or not. When Agent Green returned a few days later, Mary surprised herself by saying, "Tell me what I can do to help. If Richard was working with you, I won't let his sacrifice be wasted. I want to finish what he started." The agent studied her carefully, then nodded. "That's brave, Mrs. Thompson. But it's dangerous. If you're willing, there may be a way you can help us bring Lisa and Mark, and the people they're connected with, to justice." Mary didn't hesitate. She straightened her shoulders and met the agent's eyes. "I've been silent my whole life. Not anymore." In that moment, Mary Thompson crossed a line she never thought she'd approach. No longer just a grieving widow, no longer only a victim, she was about to step into a fight that could cost her everything, but also give her back something she thought she had lost forever. Her voice, her strength, and her purpose. The storm that Lisa had promised was indeed coming. And Mary was ready to face it. The night after Mary agreed to help the FBI, she could hardly sleep. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding in the quiet house. The walls around her felt thinner than ever, as though the shadows outside were leaning closer, listening. She thought of Richard and the years they had shared. Had he spent nights like this, lying awake with fear in his chest? Had he also wondered how much longer he could keep his secrets before they swallowed him whole? By morning, she felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't just reacting to what life threw at her. She was choosing. She made herself a strong cup of coffee, tied her hair back neatly, and when Agent Green knocked at her door, Mary opened it with steady hands. "Are you sure about this?" the agent asked gently. Mary nodded. "I've been in the dark too long. Can't keep pretending. If Richard trusted you with his life, I can trust you with mine." The FBI's plan wasn't simple. Lisa and Mark were tied to the same people Richard had been laundering money for, dangerous men with reach far beyond California. The agents suspected that Lisa and Mark had been trying to claim more than just the estate. They wanted whatever information Richard had left behind, information powerful enough to buy their way into the inner circle of those criminal networks. And since Mary was now the unexpected keeper of Richard's legacy, she was their easiest target. The FBI asked Mary to meet with Lisa, to play the role of the grieving, confused widow. Her job would be to let Lisa believe she had something to bargain with. What Lisa didn't know was that Mary would be wearing a wire. Her every word and Lisa's every answer recorded. The first meeting was arranged at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Mary arrived early, her palms damp, her throat dry. She sat at a corner table, pretending to read a menu, while across the street an unmarked car with tinted windows kept watch. When Lisa walked in, she didn't look like a grieving daughter. She looked sharp, determined, her heels clicking against the floor. She slid into the seat across from Mary, her eyes cold. "You're braver than I thought, meeting me like this," Lisa said. Mary forced a small smile. "I wanted to talk about your father's things." Lisa leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Cut the act, Mary. I know you found something. Dad wasn't just some businessman, and you know it now. Where are the files?" Mary's pulse hammered in her ears. The small microphone beneath her blouse felt heavy, like it could give her away at any moment. She swallowed hard. "There were papers. But I don't understand them. I thought maybe you could explain." Lisa's eyes narrowed, studying her. For a moment, Mary feared she had pushed too far. But then Lisa smirked. "Good. That means you haven't run to the police." "Smart choice. Those papers are worth more than this house, more than everything Dad left behind. Hand them to me, and maybe we can finally be done with each other." Mary's heart ached at the cruelty in her stepdaughter's voice. How had they come to this? A daughter and stepmother sitting in a cafe, talking not of love or grief, but of stolen secrets and hidden deals. She managed to nod. "I'll think about it." That was enough for the FBI. When Mary left the cafe, her legs trembling, Agent Green met her outside. "You did perfectly," she whispered. "We've got her voice on tape, admitting she knows about the files. That's a start." But it wasn't enough. Over the next week, the pressure on Mary grew. She received strange phone calls at night. Silent lines, then a click. Once, she found a black car parked outside her gate, its engine running, though no one ever knocked. Lisa was circling her, tightening the net. One evening Nancy came to visit. She found Mary sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon with tired eyes. "You're stronger than you realize," Nancy said softly, taking her hand. "But strength doesn't mean doing this alone. Don't forget you've got people on your side." Mary squeezed her friend's hand. "I just don't want to be afraid anymore. I spent years afraid of speaking up, afraid of losing Richard, afraid of Lisa's anger. Now I'm afraid of what happens if I don't stand my ground. But maybe that's the kind of fear that makes us braver." Nancy smiled. "Exactly." The FBI soon asked Mary to meet Lisa again, this time at the house. Mary resisted at first. Her home felt like her last safe place, but Agent Green explained the strategy. "If she comes to you, she'll reveal more. And we'll be ready." So Mary agreed. The night Lisa arrived, the air felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. She walked into the living room like she owned it, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Where are they?" she demanded. Mary stood tall, her voice steadier than before. "You mean the papers?" Lisa crossed her arms. "Don't play games with me. Dad owed people. Dangerous people. If I don't deliver those files, they'll come after me. After Mark. Do you want that blood on your hands?" Mary's chest tightened. For the first time, Lisa's mask slipped, revealing not just anger but fear. But Mary couldn't forget the bitterness, the threats, the way Lisa had spoken in court. "You don't want those papers for protection," Mary said quietly. "You want power. You want to step into your father's place." Lisa's eyes flashed. "And what if I do? Maybe I deserve it. He never gave me anything. Not his love, not his trust. At least I can take what's left. At that moment, Mary understood something. Lisa wasn't just greedy, she was broken. She had spent her life chasing a father's love she never received, and now her hunger for recognition had turned into ambition. But that realization didn't make her less dangerous. The FBI stormed the house minutes later, pretending it was coincidence. Lisa was caught off guard, her words still echoing on the wire. She was taken into custody, her face pale with fury. Yet Mark was still free. And in the days that followed, Mary learned just how far he was willing to go. He called her late one night, his voice low, threatening. "You think you've won, don't you? But this isn't over. Richard left things behind you can't even imagine. You don't know the people you're dealing with. Walk away now before it's too late." Mary hung up the phone with trembling hands. The war wasn't over. It was only beginning. But she no longer felt like the powerless widow she had once been. She had walked through fire already, and though she was scarred, she was standing. Looking at her reflection in the mirror that night, Mary whispered to herself, "You're not the same woman anymore. You can do this." And deep inside, for the first time since Richard's death, she believed it. The storm was breaking, and Section 5 would be where everything came to a head, where the truth about Richard's secrets, Lisa's ambition, and Mark's threats collided in a final dangerous showdown. The days after Lisa's arrest were strangely quiet, but the silence was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hummed with tension, the way the air feels before a thunderstorm breaks. Mary felt it in her bones. She knew Lisa's downfall would only provoke Mark to act, and Mark was reckless enough to be dangerous. Agent Green checked on her often, urging her to stay cautious. But Mary refused to leave her home again. "I've already lost too much," she told the agent firmly. "If Mark wants to find me, he'll have to come here. And I won't be running." One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of red and gold, Mary sat in her kitchen, sipping tea. The house creaked softly in the cooling air. It was almost peaceful, until the sound of gravel crunching outside broke the illusion. Her heart raced as she peered out the window. A dark sedan was parked by the gate. She didn't need to guess who it was. Moments later, the front door swung open without a knock. Mark stepped inside, his face hard, his movements sharp with anger. "You ruined everything," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "Lisa's in jail because of you. Do you know what you've done? Do you know who you've crossed?" Mary's hands trembled, but she stood her ground. "You chose this path, Mark. You and Lisa. Don't blame me for the choices you made." Mark slammed his fist on the table, making the teacup rattle. "Don't talk to me like you're innocent. You think Richard was some saint. He was in this up to his neck. And you, his precious wife, don't tell me you didn't suspect anything. Now all his secrets are mine, and I'll finish what he started." Mary's chest tightened. She remembered Richard's files, the hidden accounts, the cryptic words, Project Sierra. She realized Mark wasn't just after money. He was after control, the same kind of power Richard had brushed against but never fully taken. "You don't know what you're playing with," Mary said softly. "These people don't care about you. You're nothing to them. You'll end up destroyed just like Richard." Mark's eyes burned with fury. "Then you'll go down with me." Before she could react, he pulled a small pistol from his jacket, pointing it straight at her. Time slowed. Mary felt her breath catch, her pulse thundering in her ears. She had faced Lisa's cruelty, Richard's secrets, the FBI's revelations, but never this, never the cold barrel of a gun pointed at her in her own home. And yet, as she stood there, something shifted inside her. She thought of Richard, how he had lived in shadows, always hiding. She thought of Lisa, consumed by anger, blind to love. She thought of herself, silent for too long, always shrinking to keep the peace. Not anymore. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "If you kill me, Mark, you won't find what you're looking for. Richard didn't leave those secrets in this house. He left them with people who know what to do with them. The FBI already has enough to put you away for life. So go ahead. Pull the trigger. But know this. This is the end of the road for you. Mark's hand shook slightly, the gun wavering. He hadn't expected her defiance. At that exact moment, the living room door burst open. Agents Green and Cole stormed in, guns raised, their voices commanding. "Drop it! FBI!" Mark froze, his eyes darting wildly between Mary and the agents. For a split second, Mary feared he would shoot out of desperation, but then his arm dropped, the gun clattering to the floor. He sank to his knees, his anger collapsing into something that looked almost like despair. The agents cuffed him swiftly, reading him his rights. As they dragged him away, Mark glanced back at Mary, his face twisted. "This isn't over. You don't know what's coming." But Mary didn't flinch. She stood tall, watching him disappear into the night. For the first time in months, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. When the house was quiet again, Agent Green turned to her. "You were brave tonight, Mrs. Thompson. Braver than most people could ever be." Mary gave a small, tired smile. "I wasn't brave. I was just tired of being afraid." In the days that followed, the investigation unraveled more of Richard's hidden life. Project Sierra, it turned out, was the code name for an operation that had helped dismantle part of a criminal empire. Richard had indeed been laundering money, but every transaction, every wire transfer, had been part of a carefully constructed trap to expose bigger players. His work had saved lives, but it had also cost him his own peace, his relationship with Lisa, and in the end, perhaps even his life. Mary wept when she learned the full truth. She wept for the husband she had loved, for the daughter she had lost to bitterness, and for the years she had spent in silence. But she also felt something new, a deep sense of pride. Richard had carried a terrible burden, and though he hadn't been able to share it, he had never stopped protecting her. Months passed, and the house grew quieter again. Lisa remained in prison, Mark faced trial, and the criminal network they had tried to inherit crumbled piece by piece. Mary visited the courthouse once, not out of spite, but to look her stepchildren in the eye one last time. Lisa refused to meet her gaze. Mark glared with hatred. But Mary felt no bitterness, only sorrow for what could have been. On the way home, she stopped at a small park she and Richard used to walk through. The benches were old, the trees tall and full of life. She sat there, closing her eyes, listening to the sound of children laughing in the distance. In that moment she spoke softly, as though Richard were sitting beside her. "You carried so much alone. I wish you had trusted me with your truth. But I understand now. You weren't just my husband, you were a fighter. And I'll keep fighting too. Not with secrets but with honesty. Not with fear but with courage." When she opened her eyes, the sky was turning golden with evening light. She felt lighter, freer. The storm had passed. And though her life would never be the same, Mary knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer just a widow left behind in the shadows of secrets. She was a survivor. A woman who had found her voice, and with it, her strength. The story of Richard, Lisa, and Mark had ended in betrayal, danger, and tragedy. But Mary's story was still unfolding, one of resilience, truth, and hope. As she walked home that evening, her steps were steady, her heart unburdened. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. Felt like something to embrace. And in the quiet California dusk, Mary Thompson finally allowed herself to smile.